Let me start with something uncomfortable. You're scrolling, thumb moving on autopilot. Selfies, couples, gym mirrors, coffee cups, birthdays. Another main character moment. And then, you realize someone is missing. Not unfollowed, not inactive. Just invisible. No profile picture updates, no face in the feed, no proof they exist. And here's the weird part. You know this person is doing fine, maybe even better than fine. They have friends, they laugh, they go places, they live. They just don't post themselves. And if you're honest, a tiny voice in your head whispers something like, why don't they want to be seen? Are they insecure? Do they hate how they look? Or are they think they're better than this? Or maybe this hit a little too close because you are that person. You have photos, you just don't upload them. And every time someone says, why don't you post more? You feel weirdly defensive but can't fully explain why. So let's slow this down, because psychology says something important here. Not posting your photos is rarely about fear. More often, it's about boundaries. And that's where this gets interesting. The first core concept: privacy is not the same as insecurity. Social media has trained us to believe one dangerous equation. Visibility equals confidence. Silence equals weakness. But that equation is flawed. Psychologists use a term called privacy orientation. It describes how strongly someone values control over their personal information, especially emotional and visual access. People with a high privacy orientation don't feel safer by being seen. They feel safer by choosing when and how they're seen. That's a massive difference. Let me tell you a quick story. A story you might recognize. I once knew someone, let's call him Alex. Alex was sharp, funny, social. The kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately make it lighter. But online, nothing. No selfies, no vacation shots, no look at me thriving energy. One day, someone jokingly said, "Bro, are you even real? You never post." Alex laughed and said something that stuck with me. "I don't like turning my life into content." That sentence sounds casual, but psychologically, it's loaded. Alex wasn't hiding, he was protecting. He understood, maybe intuitively, that once something is posted, it stops being yours. It becomes a performance, a comparison point, a data point in someone else's mental ranking system. And he didn't want his face to become a scoreboard. The psychology behind this. Research on self-regulation and emotional boundaries shows that people who post less often score higher on internal validation. That means they feel okay without feedback. They don't need likes to stabilize their mood. They don't need comments to confirm they matter. Now, important pause here. This does not mean all people who post selfies are insecure. That's lazy psychology. What it means is this. People who don't post often tend to ask a different internal question. Most people subconsciously ask, how will this be received? They ask instead, do I even want to share this? That shift from reaction to intention is huge. It's the difference between broadcasting and choosing. A quick reality check. Pattern interrupt. Be honest with yourself for a second. Have you ever taken a photo, stared at it, thought, I look fine, and still decided not to post it? Not because you hated it, but because something felt unnecessary. That feeling isn't self-doubt, it's discernment. And our culture doesn't talk about that enough. Why this feels strange in today's world. Social platforms are built on one psychological loop: expression, feedback, dopamine. When someone opts out of that loop, especially visually, it quietly threatens the system. Because it says, my sense of self doesn't live here. And that makes people uncomfortable. Why? Because if they don't need validation, What does that say about how much we do? So instead of curiosity, we project assumptions. We call them shy, antisocial, insecure, low confidence. But psychologists would argue the opposite is often true. What's really happening internally? People who don't post their photos often have a strong separation between identity and presentation, a preference for real-world intimacy over ambient attention, a lower tolerance for being misinterpreted. They understand something subtle but powerful. Once your image is public, you lose control of the narrative. Someone can judge it on a bad day, compare it unfairly, reduce you to a snapshot. And some people simply don't want their complexity flattened into pixels. Let me ask you this. When you imagine posting a photo of yourself, what feels heavier? The effort of uploading it? Or the awareness that people will form opinions about you? That answer matters, because it tells you whether your silence is about fear or agency. And for many people, it's agency. The quiet confidence nobody talks about. There's a form of confidence that's loud, and there's a form that's grounded. The loud one says, "Look at me." The grounded one says, "I know who I am." Psychology doesn't romanticize either, but it does recognize that grounded confidence tends to be more stable, less anxious, and less reactive. People who don't post their photos often feel no urgency to prove anything. They're not waiting to be perceived to exist. They already do. Natural transition. Now here's where this gets deeper and a little uncomfortable, because privacy is only the surface. Underneath it sits something even more powerful. Self-concept clarity. How clearly you understand who you are without external mirrors. And once you understand that, you'll never look at quiet profiles the same way again. That's where we're going next. Let's talk about something most people never realize they're chasing. Not attention, not likes, not even approval. They're chasing clarity. Clarity about who they are when no one is watching. Psychologists call this self-concept clarity. It's a fancy term for a simple question. Do I know who I am without checking how others react to me? And this, right here, is one of the biggest reasons some people never post their photos. Why posting feels compulsory for some people. Think about how posting usually works. You take a picture. You don't just ask, "Do I like this?" You ask, "Is this flattering? Does this fit my vibe? What will people think? Does this match who I've been online?" That's not creativity. That's identity maintenance. For a lot of people, social media becomes a mirror they constantly adjust themselves to. They don't just express who they learn who they are from the feedback. And that's exhausting. The people who don't post are playing a different game. People with high self-concept clarity already have answers to questions like, what matters to me? What kind of person am I becoming? What do I respect in myself? So when they consider posting a photo, there's no internal urgency, no tension, no "this will define me" pressure. Posting feels optional, not necessary. And when something feels optional, you're way more likely to skip it. A subtle but important difference. Let me say this carefully. Not posting doesn't mean I don't care what people think. It means I already know what I think. That's not arrogance, that's integration. Psychological studies show that people with high self-concept clarity experience less social anxiety, less emotional whiplash from feedback, more consistency in values across situations. They don't need to check the room before deciding how they feel about themselves. A small thought experiment. Imagine this. Your phone disappears for 30 days. No photos, no posting, no stories. Now ask yourself, would you feel relieved or restless? Would you feel peaceful or invisible? Would you feel more yourself or less? There's no good answer, But your reaction tells you everything about how much of your identity lives outside of you. Why silence often gets misread. Here's where things get unfair. People tend to assume quiet equals lacking, but psychology often shows the opposite. Silence can come from internal stability, low need for social calibration, high tolerance for ambiguity. In other words, if you don't need to constantly signal who you are, it's usually because you already feel anchored. And that anchor doesn't need an audience. The story no one tells about comparison. Social media doesn't just show lives, it creates reference points. Every photo becomes a silent question. Am I doing as well as them? People with strong self-concept clarity are less vulnerable to this loop because their self-worth isn't comparative. It's internal. So, instead of scrolling and subtly measuring themselves, they disengage. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly. And when you don't participate in comparison, posting your own image feels pointless. Why post into a game you're not playing? Let's talk about emotional safety. There's another layer here, one people rarely acknowledge. Posting your face makes you emotionally reachable. Not physically, psychologically. It opens you to misinterpretation, projection, casual judgment, being remembered wrong. Some people are fine with that trade-off. Others aren't. And emotionally intelligent people tend to be very intentional about where they place their vulnerability. They don't give everyone front-row access. A moment of self-reflection. Ask yourself this, no pressure to answer out loud. When you don't post, does it feel like hiding or holding something sacred? Those two feelings are wildly different. And people who don't post their photos often experience the second one. Their life isn't a trailer, it's a full movie they don't need to preview. Why this can look like detachment, but isn't. From the outside, this behavior can look cold. No updates, no photos, no explanation. But internally, it's often warm, grounded, and intentional. These people tend to invest more in one-on-one relationships, private conversations, experiences that don't need proof. Their sense of connection is deep, not broadcast. Where this starts to shift. Up until now, we've talked about privacy, self-concept clarity, emotional boundaries. But there's one more trait that quietly connects all of this. Something even more misunderstood. Emotional security. Not confidence that needs applause, not toughness that avoids feeling, but a calm, steady sense of, I'm okay. And once you understand emotional security, you'll see why some people don't post their photos and never feel the need to explain themselves. That's where we're heading next. There's a type of confidence we celebrate loudly. The kind that posts, the kind that announces, the kind that says, I'm here, see me, validate me. But psychology has always known there's another kind. Quieter, steadier, almost boring from the outside. It's called emotional security. And this is where people who don't post their photos really start to make sense. What emotional security actually looks like. Emotionally secure people don't feel the need to constantly regulate their emotions through other people. They don't need likes to stabilize their mood, comments to reassure their worth, attention to feel real. That doesn't mean they don't enjoy appreciation. It means appreciation is a bonus, not a requirement. And here's the key insight most people miss. For emotionally secure people, attention can feel destabilizing. Not exciting, not flattering, destabilizing. Why attention isn't always comforting. When you post a photo, you're not just sharing an image. You're inviting opinions, interpretations, projections, comparisons. You're handing a piece of yourself to people who don't actually know you. For some personalities, that feels energizing. For others, it feels like static. Emotionally secure people are often highly sensitive to emotional noise. They notice how attention pulls them outward, away from themselves. So instead of thinking, why don't they want attention? The better question is, why would they need it? A story that explains this perfectly. Think of someone you know who is calm in chaos. The person who doesn't overshare, who doesn't react dramatically, who doesn't explain themselves endlessly. When something good happens, they smile. When something bad happens, they handle it quietly. That person isn't numb. They're regulated. And regulated people don't chase stimulation the same way dysregulated people do. Social media is stimulation. Visual attention is stimulation. Feedback is stimulation. Some people thrive on it. Others protect themselves from it. The validation trap. Let's talk honestly about validation. Validation feels good in the moment, but it has a side effect. It trains your nervous system to ask, how am I being perceived right now? Emotionally secure people don't want to live inside that question. They'd rather ask, am I okay with myself? That's why posting can feel unnecessary or even invasive to them. They already closed the loop internally. Pattern interrupt, a gentle truth. Have you noticed this? The more you need to post, the harder it is to stop, and the easier it is to feel off when no one responds. Emotionally secure people sense this early, so they step back before the loop forms, not because they're superior, but because they're protective. This is where people get it wrong. People often assume they don't post because they're afraid. They don't post because they don't like themselves. But psychology often finds the opposite. People who avoid posting their photos frequently have lower attachment anxiety, higher emotional regulation, and less dependence on external affirmation. They don't avoid attention because they feel small. They avoid it because they feel whole. Part 4. The digital illusion and the choice to stay real. Now we need to talk about the part no one likes to admit. Some people don't post their photos because they see through the illusion. And once you see it, it's hard to unsee. The illusion social media runs on. Social media quietly teaches one rule. If it isn't posted, it didn't matter. Birthdays don't count unless they're documented. Joy doesn't count unless it's shared. Growth doesn't count unless it's visible. But psychologists call this symbolic substitution. It's when representation replaces experience. And some people reject that trade entirely. Why real experiences start feeling smaller online? Here's something subtle. When you start thinking about how a moment will look online, you stop fully inhabiting the moment itself. Your brain splits. Part of you is living. Part of you is curating. People who don't post their photos often dislike that split. They want moments to stay whole, unobserved, unjudged, unmeasured, just lived. Humans naturally compare. That's normal. But social media turns comparison into a constant background hum. Everyone else's best angles, best lighting, best moments, best timing. People who opt out understand this. They know comparison doesn't start when you scroll. It starts when you post. Once your image is out there, your mind begins to wonder, how did it do? That wondering costs peace. Some people decide the price is too high. The confidence of not needing proof. There's a deep psychological strength in not needing evidence of your life, not needing receipts, witnesses, applause, just knowing. People who don't post their photos often live by an unspoken belief. If I know it happened, that's enough. That belief sounds simple, but it's rare. Imagine two people living the exact same life, same friends, same joy, same struggles. One documents it, one doesn't. Which life is more real? Trick question. They're equally real. But one is performed, the other is protected. And choosing protection doesn't mean you're hiding. It means you're discerning. Why this quiet choice is often misunderstood. We live in a culture that rewards visibility, so invisibility gets pathologized.
But psychology reminds us not everything meaningful is loud. Not everything healthy is shared. Not everything valuable needs an audience. Some people don't post their photos because their identity is internal. Their confidence is regulated. Their validation is self-sourced. Their life is not content. So the next time you notice someone who never posts their face, don't assume they're insecure. Don't assume they're disconnected. Don't assume they're hiding. They might just be living a life that doesn't need proof. And if this video made you reflect, really reflect on how you show up online, that awareness alone is powerful. Because the strongest people don't ask, "Do you see me?" They ask, "Am I at peace with myself?" And sometimes, the answer doesn't need to be posted.
If this video made you pause for a second and reflect, like really reflect, do me a small favor. Hit the like button so this reaches the people who quietly need it, and subscribe if you want more conversations that go deeper than the surface. This channel isn't about chasing noise or trends. It's about understanding yourself and others in a world that rarely slows down. If that resonates with you, you're already in the right place.